So we have some continued bad news for GPU buyers, especially those looking at Nvidia's RTX 4080. Now, this isn't a huge surprise, but look at some of these prices. $1,549 for the Asus Strix. Now, this is a premium model, but there's a lot that we have to ask here. I mean, a lot of these models are actually $1399, a few others are $1499. Only sort of the really base ones are the MSRP of $1199. First of all, here's the problem. The RTX 4080 is already way too expensive at $1199. The 3080 started its life at $699. That is a massive jump from one generation to the next. Of course, there was the 12GB 3080 that they tried to price it at this level as well, but that one typically wasn't nearly as successful because it came sort of when the GPU craze was going to start to die down a little bit. But to buy an RTX 4080 at $1199 is already expensive. And then you add $350 on top of it for something like the Asus Strix. I think that's pushing it a little bit. Don't you guys think? I mean, you could literally buy a high-end CPU for that price, motherboard. You can even buy probably an RTX 3060. Heck, you see that Intel Arc behind me? You can buy that. That's $349. That's the price difference between the same 4080 and a Strix 4080. Now, we saw from the RTX 4090, which also had some of these type of crazy price differences. I mean, the MSRP is $1599, and we did see a lot of models for that, starting with the Founders Edition and then other models. And then, of course, the Asus Strix, which is always a little bit more expensive, was $1999. And that one, believe it or not, sold out the fastest, if you guys can believe it. When I was in line at Micro Center with the RTX 4090 launch, they had a couple of these, very few. They were the first ones to go. You would think the most expensive 4090, nobody's going to want to buy that. That's bad logic. People went for that one immediately because, after all, it is the Strix model and it's going to be higher in demand. So is the same going to happen for the RTX 4080 Strix? And now let's hear a word from our sponsor. Priced pretty good is a Windows CD key. Today's video sponsor is going to be VIP-CDKdeals.com. Very simple process. You can get a Windows 10 Pro CD key and remember to use code CC20 for a nice discount. And now back to the video. $1549 is a little bit of a tough pill to swallow. It's not like the 4090. First, the 4090 is the highest end GPU, so the ceiling for the price is a little bit different. Buyers are going to be more willing to pay a more astronomical and ridiculous price compared to other GPUs. Like, it wouldn't make sense to have such a markup on a 3060 or a 4070, would it? But on the 4090, going from $1599 to $1999, which doesn't seem like a massive difference when you compare the huge price, even though it is, doesn't seem nearly as bad as when you do it on a 4080, which, although it's still a very high-end GPU, it's not the highest end GPU, and $1549 brings it within $50 of the RTX 4090. Now, what are you getting for that $50 difference on the 4090? You're going to be getting a huge performance uplift. Even the base RTX 4090s, as we saw from countless reviews, had very little difference from the more expensive ones, like even the Strix at $1999. You're not paying at all for any measurable performance gain. At most, it'd be a few percentages here or there. Most of that is going to be in the cooler design. Maybe some of the more expensive ones might be a little bit more quiet. And of course, almost all of that price, in my opinion, goes to the aesthetics and just having sort of that brand and design name. Like an Asus Strix is really cool. It's going to look much cooler, in some people's opinion, than something maybe like a Zotac or a Gigabyte or something like that. So that's going to justify it for most people. But even amongst the 4090s, there is not that big of a performance gap, if at all, between a $1599 one and one that you're literally paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars more. If anything, the Founders Edition 4090, which is $1599, is in fact generally objectively superior compared to most of the more expensive 4090s with its PCB and just its general build quality. And that's an objective fact. People have looked at it. They've seen that its construction is just much better than a lot of the other 4090s. But that's comparing to NVIDIA's Founder Edition, which they do have an advantage compared to the AIB partners. So the AIB partners are just really milking this price. Even on the 4090, and you're going to see the same thing happen on the 4080, you have a few levels, for example, of the Asus TUF. You had on the 4090 the regular base 1599, and then you had one that was in between the Strix and that mid-range one that was, a little bit more overclocked, but not really that big of a difference. On paper, it may show a little bit difference. Maybe some of them have a little bit higher power limit, but in practice, the difference really isn't there when you're going to be playing games. Build quality is often the same. They use the same coolers amongst like the TUF and the Strix. Of course, is going to be a little bit different design. So Asus isn't the only one doing this, of course. You have models here from Gigabyte and MSI that are also much more expensive. It just really doesn't make that much sense on the RTX 4080 because, like I said, you're getting right next to the base 4090, a $50 difference between a 4080 Strix and even the worst base 4090 translates to a massive performance difference. Have you guys seen the difference between a 4090 and a 4080 as per Nvidia's own numbers? And with some of the reviews we've seen on the 4090, we can kind of extrapolate that data. The 4090 is a completely different tier GPU than the 4080. In the past generation, the GPUs were certainly a lot closer in performance. For example, a 3090 didn't have such a big gap between it and a 3080. Most of the difference was in the VRAM, which was just, utilized by content creators and people like that for other purposes. But in terms of gaming, the difference really wasn't that big. It's not the same thing with the 4090 versus 4080. From Nvidia's own performance numbers, you can see the gap is fairly substantial. And even when we look at the CUDA cores and the specs, of course, not to mention the actual VRAM that you have there, the difference is definitely massive this generation, making a really expensive 4080 a terrible value proposition. It really comes nowhere close to the 4090, even the base one. Now, if you're comparing an $1199 base MSRP 4080, then maybe you have a little bit more argument because at least you have a bigger gap between that and the RTX 4090. You're going to have a few $100s difference, but a $50 difference is really a no-go. I don't care how much you like that Asus Strix. It just completely makes no sense. And this is before we even get into any discussion about the competition. Remember, AMD's next generation GPU, which are coming out just next month, the highest end one, the 7900 XTX, comes with an MSRP of $999. And of course, the regular XT comes with the MSRP of $899. So let's take those base numbers. Of course, not fair to compare that to the AIB Nvidia pricing. So you would have to compare it really to the base 4080 pricing, which is $1199. So you're still talking about $999 versus $1199. Now, we don't have performance data for the 7900 XTX. That's correct to point out. But if we deduct some of the performance data from what AMD has given us, it's clear that they're obviously, in their own admission, they're going for the 4080 in terms of the performance. So we can expect it to at least perform in a similar fashion with traditional rasterization, if not outright beat the 4080 in many games, especially the 7900 XTX. That's our guess. We don't have the numbers we're going to see when these reviews come out in December. We'll be able to tell exactly what the 7900 XTX does, but from judging from the very vague numbers AMD have given us, that's the conclusion we can draw. And of course, we don't think it's going to beat the 4090, so that's going to continue being sort of the Uber GPU separately from everything else. And then of course, AMD's AIB pricing has been a problem in the past. I've pointed that out. Viewers have also mentioned that. Even though the reference is $999, you can fully expect the third-party AIB models to be more expensive. I complained a lot about the RX 6900 XT and the 6800 XT because you never saw $649, which is the MSRP for the 6800 XT at all. Only now are you seeing cheaper prices, but you saw these GPUs well over $1,000 for most of their life, and the 6900 XT at some points, like people have pointed out, and I mentioned in my previous videos, because of all the really insane pricing, I saw them for over $2,000 during 2021. Then of course they came down to that sort of like mid 1,000 range, which is still much more expensive than the MSRP would suggest. It never was close to $999, but that was a little bit different. It was during the GPU shortage, and I think the AIBs really made a mistake on the AMD side. I'm hoping, there's no factual evidence yet to point to the fact, but I'm hoping that Nvidia may perhaps try to rein in their AIBs a little bit more and at least keep the pricing closer to MSRP. For example, a nice 7900 XTX, it's not going to be $999 for an AIB, but maybe what if it's only $100 more, $150 more within that range instead of like $300 or $400 more. But keep in mind, AMD as well as the AIB partners are going to be watching what happens with the Nvidia 4080. We can tell from the 4090 sales already that they sold out in massive numbers. I mean, at the Micro Center that I went to on launch day, they had 150 RTX 4090s, which is a pretty large number. They had much less of 3090s when that came out. So that sold out really quickly, and you can check online now. It would be very difficult to actually find a 4090 in stock, and supposedly Nvidia shipped over 100,000 of them. That's either a big number or a small number by your estimation. It's going to depend on a lot of more factors than we're really aware of, but they're definitely out there. They're shipping, but they're definitely selling out. And we saw from the scalper market, it's not as bad as it was, but people are still getting a premium for the 4090s, meaning that the AIBs feel fine pricing these GPUs like this, and AMD and Nvidia are certainly watching this. So are these GPUs going to sell? Is that 1549 4080 Strix going to sell? Absolutely. I think it's probably going to be the first one to go, even though it's the same price as a 4090. Unless they have 4090s in stock next to it, most likely the buyers that want that 4080 Strix are going to go for it. Of course, if you put an Asus TUF 4090 at $1599, the base one, next to a 4080 Strix at $1549, I think most people would make the right decision and get the cheap 4090 for $50. I mean, if you care anything about performance, that's what you get, unless you're just absolutely insane over that Strix design, which it's different, I guess. I have nothing against it. I think it's pretty cool, but nothing to sacrifice that much performance for $50 for. That's a massive difference. But now, what if you change that scenario a little bit and there's no 4090 that you can actually buy in stock, but you do have that Strix? That's why I think a lot of people are going to buy it. They're going to figure, instead of going and spending hundreds of dollars more for a 4090 Strix, which may be well over $2,000 on the secondhand market, if they can't find one in stock, they'll probably be more than happy at overpaying for that GPU, therefore giving Nvidia and AMD the signals to go ahead and keep these GPU prices high. Let's see what happens. Let's see how the 4080 does next week. Remember to stay subscribed to see what happens. Let me know down below what you think will happen with AMD's pricing. That way we can really see what's going on with this GPU next generation pricing. All right, guys, so remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.